Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and recently I was scrolling through Twitter and Bill Maher popped up in my feed. And I don't know a whole lot about Bill Maher, so I decided to click on it. And I saw the video that we're responding to today. So the video that we're responding to today is a video where Bill Maher talks about LGBT stuff. And it was evident from watching it that Bill Maher doesn't really know a whole lot about LGBT stuff. To me it really sounded like that granddad that has a whole lot of opinions on the subject, doesn't know a whole lot of stuff about it, so pretends that he's being funny about it. Now some people might say to me, well Planet, you don't know a whole lot about it because you keep on saying that sex and gender are different when they're clearly the same. To which I say, I follow the literature on the subject. The literature says that sex and gender are different things. A lot of people that say that they are the same thing tend not to have a good grasp on the subject, and tend to repeat the same talking points. And honestly, that is kind of understandable because not a lot of people will take the time to research trans issues. They'll hear someone like Bill Maher say something, not realizing that Bill Maher doesn't actually know a lot about the subject himself. Anyway, let's see what Bill Maher has to say.
Broken down over time, the LGBT population of America seems to be roughly doubling every generation. According to a recent Gallup poll, less than 1% of Americans born before 1946, that's Joe Biden's generation, identify that way. 2.6% of boomers do, 4.2% of Gen X, 10.5% of millennials, and 20.8% of Gen Z. Which means if we follow this trajectory, we will all be gay in 2054.
Okay, surely I don't have to explain the issue here, right? So for those of you that may not understand it, before you jump to they're putting chemicals in the water turning everyone gay, let me tell you about left-handedness. For whatever reason, right-handed people tend to be far more common than left-handed people. And at one point in history, left-handed people were seen as weird. Like if you were left-handed, that was just weird. Come on, you need to be like everyone else. You need to be right-handed. That's the way that God intended it. Now, people used to be punished for being left-handed. And it turns out that when you punish people for something like left-handedness, they try not to do that anymore. Now, when they stopped punishing people for being left-handed, guess what? More people became left-handed. Now, left-handedness just started skyrocketing at a rate of 2% per decade. In 1940, when 10% of all people were left-handed, it looked like in 200 years, half of all people would be left-handed. Now, 200 years has not passed yet. It's only been 80 years. So, how is that trend going? Well, it turns out that after 1940, that trend just completely slowed down, and shortly after 1960, it had just completely flatlined. So following that, we can reasonably assume that the proportion of people who are openly queer in the population will reach a point where it will just flatline. So don't worry, as fabulous as it may sound for everyone to be queer, cis-hets are not going extinct anytime soon.
And then who's going to buy this chair?
He's got a bit of a point there, but my question is, who would even buy that chair in the first place? It doesn't even look like something a straight person would buy. If I'm being completely honest, I don't think that the demographic for that chair is straight people. I think that it's people above the age of 70. Although, now that I think of it, that might actually be the demographic of Bill Maher's show.
I'm just saying that when things change this much, this fast, people are allowed to ask, what's up with that? All the babies are in the wrong bodies? Was there a mix-up at the plant, like with Captain Crunch's Oops, All Berries?
It depends who you ask. The really simple explanation is that it's just way more acceptable these days. And on the other hand, and I have legitimately heard people say this, people say that it's the 5G that's turning everyone gay. I personally think that there are two reasons. The first being, it is far more acceptable to be queer these days. The further back in time you go, the more looked down upon it was to be queer. And so a lot of people really wouldn't admit it, maybe not even to themselves. As society has a more favourable view of these things, I think a lot more people are going to go, you know what, I think I am gay, I think I am lesbian, I think I am trans, I think I am asexual. And the second reason is, I think a lot of people have found that terms that fall under queer is something that actually describes them pretty well. Like hell, even if you prefer polyamorous relationships, that falls under the label of queer. There are some people as well that go, well, I am attracted to this gender. But there are some people in my own gender that I do find attractive. There are also people that aren't attracted to anyone, like asexual people. And that's why I use the label queer rather than LGBTQIA, because queer's just one syllable. LGBTQIA, well, that's 7. Basically, what I'm saying is that people are finding out that the range of human expressions isn't just limited to vanilla.
It wasn't that long ago when adults asked a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? They meant what profession?
Okay, this might be a bit of a tangent, but he kind of brings up a point here, which I've been thinking about a lot. So we're kind of all expected to know what we want to be by the time we turn 18. And by the time we turn 15, we're expected to have a really good idea of what we want to be. We're kind of expected to know what job we want to do for the rest of our lives, without necessarily having any experience in that job. I'm 25, I still don't really know what job I want to be doing for the rest of my life. Some days I wake up and go, you know what, I want to start a band. Other days I wake up and go, I want to make a short film about someone in a bath. And then other days I go, you know what, this would be a very neat idea for a game, but unfortunately I do need to record a video. Compared to all that, gender identity is a lot easier to figure out. Sometimes it just gets handed to you, it's like just slapped on you like a kick me label. And for a lot of people, the label thing just works completely fine. However, there are people that have gender dysphoria at a young age, and at a young age they realise that this label doesn't really match who they are. I mean, if you've lived 5, 10, 15 years with this label, then you have experience with that. You don't have experience with a job. Now, to be fair, a lot of people only have experience with one label. They've been a boy for 10 years, and then they decide, you know what, I actually think I want to be a girl. And so the porn promotes to a queen, they change their gender, good stuff. They get a couple of years experience and then decide whether they like that or not. Don't you think that someone that does that would have a better idea of what their gender is than what career they want to do for the rest of their life? For me, I've always had a better grasp on my gender identity than how I want to contribute to society. There's only been a few times where I've gone, yes, this is definitely what I want to do, because I was particularly hyped in the moment. Anyway, long tangent over, let's get back to the video.
In the wake of America about to lose abortion rights, the ACLU recently tweeted a list of those who would be disproportionately harmed by this. You would think women might top that list? No, wasn't even on the list. Second on the list was LGBT. Really? Abortion rights affects gay and trans people more than, breeders?
So there's more letters in LGBT rather than just G and T. There's also L and B. B, of course, meaning bisexual. Turns out that you can be in what would be considered a straight relationship and be bisexual, which makes you part of LGBT. And also, trans men are part of LGBT. And you can still have a baby and be a trans man. It's really weird how trans men just get completely ignored in queer discourse. Now, obviously, women will be harmed by abortion being made illegal. That's kind of a no-brainer. But the thing is, some will be harmed more than others, and some men will be harmed as well, particularly trans men. Now, I don't know how the ACLU came up with their list, but they probably have a better understanding of how banning abortion will affect LGBT people than Bill Maher does. Especially seeing as Bill Maher seems to have forgotten that lesbians, bisexuals, and trans men all exist. Also, I do want to apologise if there's been certain things that I haven't talked about. These subjects are wildly complicated. Like, I could make an entire video how removing abortion rights affects different queer people. Because non-binary people exist. There are non-binary people that can get pregnant. What about lesbians that are with a trans woman? There's also all kinds of other things that can happen. There's all kinds of different factors. So it does get very complicated after a while.
I'm happy for LGBT folks that we now live in an age where they can live their authentic lives openly. And we should always be mindful of respecting and protecting. But someone needs to say it. Not everything's about you.
But they weren't first on the list. I believe black people were. So are you going to say, black people, not everything's about you? Or are you worried that some people might just go, that's racist?
And it's okay to ask questions about something that's very new and involves children.
But gay people have been around for thousands of years. Oh wait, no, you're talking about trans people. I should have known with the children thing. Yeah, let me say something different then. Trans people have been around for thousands of years. The reason why it's seen as new is because for a long time it was shamed. You can't tell me that the people that were marching against gay rights were A-OK with trans people.
The answer can't always be that anyone from a marginalized community is automatically right, trump card, mic drop, end of discussion.
Well, of course not. There are trans people that are wrong about trans issues. There are gay people that are wrong about gay issues, like Matt Powell. I just think that a trans person probably has a better idea of what being trans is like, rather than a straight cis guy.
Because we're literally experimenting on children. Maybe that's why Sweden and Finland have stopped giving puberty blockers to kids.
Now, in the case of Sweden, it was a recommendation by the health board, and it wasn't a recommendation to stop giving puberty blockers to kids. It was to stop giving puberty blockers to kids to treat gender dysphoria, although they did say except in the case of extreme circumstances. So giving cisgender children puberty blockers to alleviate problems that can be alleviated by puberty blockers is a-okay. But giving trans children puberty blockers to alleviate gender dysphoria, no, we can't do that because we just don't know enough about puberty blockers. Even though many of the side effects of puberty blockers are well known, and it's probably the best way to treat gender dysphoria in adolescence. In fact, much of the evidence given by the Swedish Health Board for not recommending puberty blockers was pretty bad. Turns out that government agencies don't always make the best decisions.
Because we just don't know much about the long-term effects. Although common sense should tell you that when you reverse the course of raging hormones, there's going to be problems.
But common sense should also tell you that puberty isn't exactly reversible. Like if it were reversible, then trans women wouldn't have to go through all the voice training that they have to go through. And also, boobs don't magically fall off if you decide to take testosterone. We
do know it hinders the development of bone density, which is kind of important if you like having a skeleton.
Now, I do have to admit that joke was actually kind of funny. Maybe it's because it's my style of humour, I don't know. But when it comes to puberty blockers lowering bone density, there's two things to do with that. So it does lower bone density whilst you're on them, but there are a couple of ways to help alleviate this problem. And once you return to puberty, your spooky scary skeleton should regain its density. But this brings us on to the second thing, being long-term bone density. Now, long-term use of puberty blockers can actually lower bone density in the long term. However, if you're only on them for about 2 to 3 years, then you should be completely fine. And I've also heard some things, the sooner that you start them, the less of an effect it will have on your bone density. Although I have not actually seen those studies yet.
Fertility and the ability to have an orgasm seem also to be affected. This isn't just a lifestyle decision, it's medical.
Of course it's a medical decision if you decide to take hormones or puberty blockers, although some trans people don't do that, and if you're one of those people, you are also valid. But the thing is, it's also a medical decision to give your child antibiotics. It's a medical decision to get your child vaccinated. We recognise that the benefits of getting your child vaccinated outweigh the risks of not getting them vaccinated. Or at least most of us do, I hope. But puberty blockers is one of those things where there are risks, and there are risks with every medication, but the benefits tend to outweigh those risks. Now people will say, oh, but they're injecting everyone with puberty blockers, and that's just not happening. The only people that I know of that get prescribed puberty blockers are the people that have diagnosed gender dysphoria. And most people that take puberty blockers to alleviate gender dysphoria then go on to actually transition later. Also, I should mention that on the fertility part, there is no evidence that just taking puberty blockers is going to lower your fertility. You need to do all the other hormone things to unlock that achievement.
Weighing trade-offs is not bigotry. Yet when a book questioning the sudden uptick in transitioning children was released, a trans lawyer with the ACLU named Chase Strangio tweeted, "Stopping the circulation of this book and these ideas is 100% a hill I will die on." How very civil liberties of him.
You know, stopping the circulation of certain books and ideas within them is definitely a hill that I can see myself dying on. Like, let's say that there was a book full of Nazi rhetoric and Nazi ideas. I think that people would be okay with stopping the circulation of that book. Likewise, I'm not a big fan of transphobic books that use pseudoscience to push bad ideas. And yes, I do have an episode of pseudoscience papers planned for rapid onset gender dysphoria. That is some of the pseudoscience that I know that is mentioned about in Abigail Schreier's book, by the way.
Chase, by the way, has just been named one of the grand marshals of this year's New York City Pride March, along with 3 other trans people and a lesbian. What's missing here? Oh right, a gay man.
He looks so smug there, like he said the most intelligent thing that he could think of. Let me just say though that most of queer discourse these days does focus on trans people. If the discourse is mostly focused on, let's say, bi people, intersex people, or asexual people, then I'd want them to be represented more, wouldn't you?
Compared to trans, gay is practically cis, and cis is practically Mormon.
Okay, I've got to admit that was funny for two reasons. The first being, it was just a funny joke. Come on. The second being, gay is actually cisgender? Maybe he meant straight, but you never know. Bill Maher doesn't seem to be the person who's most up to date on these things.
Yes, part of the rise in LGBT numbers is from people feeling free enough to tell it to a pollster, and that's all to the good. But some of it is, it's trendy. Penis equals man? Okay, boomer.
Okay, so there's a few things to mention here. Firstly, you can be an ally and just not be trans. That is something that you can be. And secondly, I don't think that the rise of people identifying as queer is solely due to trans people. Because when I was at school, gay was an insult. If someone said, that's gay, that was a bad thing. Nowadays, if someone says, that's gay, usually it means fabulous, happy, rainbows, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's fucking gay!
Of course, many people have realised that you can also be attracted to more than just one gender as well, which means that there will be a lot more people identifying as bisexual these days than there used to. One of the big problems that I have with this is that Bill is conflating the entirety of LGBTQIA, all that stuff, with trans. And whilst I certainly don't deny that there will have definitely been an uptick in the amount of people that identify as trans over the last couple of years, that's not the entirety of LGBT.
Remember, the prime directive of every teen is anything to shock and challenge the squares who brought you up.
I really don't think that people are being gay just to make their parents mad. And even if we're talking about trans people, and more specifically probably non-binary people, a lot of them don't take hormones. I know non-binary people that don't use hormones, yet feel dysphoric when you use their dead name. It's almost like Bill Maher doesn't actually know a whole lot about this subject. There's a whole lot of things that I can talk about when it comes to this video, honestly, that I choose to not talk about because otherwise this video would be an hour long.
Dr. Erica Anderson is a prominent 71-year-old clinical psychologist who is herself transgender and who now says, I think it's gone too far.
So the things that she says is more to do with people not following procedure. People before they get hormones are usually supposed to have a psychiatric evaluation. However, she says not everybody is getting that. And that can really be an issue. The problem is that the waiting lists can be quite long. And I think the solution to this is really just to have more people doing psychiatric evaluations. It should not be made harder to transition. It should be made easier to go through all the checks and balances.
The LA Times summarizes, she's come to believe that some children identifying as trans are falling under the influence of their peers and social media.
Now, whilst I don't necessarily agree with her, that is what psychiatric evaluations are for. I also have not seen any evidence that children are getting prescribed puberty blockers before getting a gender dysphoria diagnosis.
If this spike in trans children is all natural, why is it regional? Either Ohio is shaming them or California is creating them.
You know, Bill, you did give an answer there, and I'd wager that it is the former.
If we can't admit that in certain enclaves there is some level of trendiness to the idea of being anything other than straight, then this is not a serious science-based discussion.
Firstly, I don't think people are being gay due to trendiness. Secondly, non-binary people, what's the problem with being non-binary? Like, yeah, some non-binary people will want hormones, but I don't see people guzzling hormones because they think that that's trendy. This really feels like an effort to just conflate everything with everything else. There's a lot of nuance to this conversation, and if you can't handle the nuance, then you're not having a scientific discussion.
I don't understand parents who won't let their 9-year-old walk to the corner without a helmet, an EpiPen, and a GPS tracker. But hormone blockers and genital surgery, fine.
Okay, children are just not getting genital surgery. That is just not something that happens to kids. And do you want to know the waiting list here in New Zealand for those surgeries? 40 years! I have a friend who has been on estrogen for a year. She would have to wait 40 years to get bottom surgery. Now, I really hope that there's been some kind of miscommunication there and that it's actually on the lower end of things. But got to admit that that's quite a long time. That's not the kind of thing that you can just sign your kid up for and it will happen the next day. That's something that's going to take years before you can get that done.
And if you're a man who wants to experience life without a pair of balls, you do not have to get surgery. You can get married.
Can we just stop with the I hate my wife jokes or marriage sucks jokes? Because I feel like they're not funny anymore, and they haven't been funny for like 10 years. And yeah, sure, I wrote a joke like that a few years ago, but they've been done to death by now. And yeah, marriage sucks, but that's more because it's pointless and costs a lot of money. In fact, I think that genital surgery would be cheaper than marriage in a lot of cases. And there's the added bonus of you wouldn't have everyone watching you while it happens.
And never forget, children are impressionable and very, very stupid. Maybe the boy who thinks he's a girl is just gay.
Well, actually, there has been a recent study that has found that most trans children, after 5 years, are still trans. And it goes back to the point that I said earlier. Kids probably have a better idea of their gender identity than what they want to do for a job.
Maybe the girl who hates girly stuff just needs to learn that being female doesn't mean you have to act like a Kardashian.
So I'll let the applause play out there because I do agree with that statement to an extent. Like, maybe we should just not have these gender stereotypes that everyone has to live up to all the time. Like, if you want to be a cis guy that sometimes paints their nails and wears cute anime t-shirts, power to you. It doesn't mean that you're less of a man if you do that, and it should be perfectly okay to do so. But we also need to recognise that trans people have different experiences to cisgender people, and we can't just put it all in a nice cisgender box. Gender dysphoria isn't just simply liking opposite gender things. In fact, that's more akin to gender euphoria. It's more of completely hating being one gender than the other. And obviously, if you haven't had gender dysphoria, then you're not going to be able to say, okay, I know what that's like, because you don't know what that's like. So maybe listen to people that have experienced that. And now, you know better. Wait, wrong channel. Anyway, I think that's a good point to end this, so leave a like and subscribe if you like this video. Leave a comment letting me know what you'd like me to make a video on next. As always, a big shout out to my $20 or more patrons: Hugh Jarsz, M.C.Nutkin, SHaKie, Wolfie, Morrie, Graymore Ghost, KidVicious, Sacha Campbell, Militant Agnostic, and Elke Loobuyck. If you want to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. There should be a link there. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me...
Oh, that's fucking gay!